So I came to SA. I had no idea what the heck was going on. I swear I had no idea why you were all using weird words, why you couldn't just talk simple English, why you needed to use words like surrender and character defects and all sorts of other weird things like, I don't know, even meditation was a weird word. I didn't know what it meant. And one of the weird words was sponsor. I spoke to my sponsor. I spoke to my sponsor. I had no idea what that was. So I asked someone after, I don't know how many meetings I went to, I said, "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Sure." I said, "What's a sponsor?" He said, "Don't worry about that right now. Just go to meetings. When it's time for you to have a sponsor, you'll know what it is." I said, "Fine." I was in therapy at that time with an addictions therapist, like a guy who specialized in sex addiction. And a couple of weeks into SA, like maybe 6 weeks in, he's like, "Did you get a sponsor yet?" And honestly, I had no idea if I had a sponsor because no one ever told me what a sponsor was. So I said, "I don't know." And he found that very funny. I said, "I might have one. I don't know what it is." And there was a guy in my group who was actually seeing this same therapist. So he got permission to pass my number along to this guy. This guy called me, and I went to his house. And he opened the big book, and we started reading. And he said, "Are you ready to start the 12 steps?" I said, "Sure." He said, "If I'm your sponsor, then we do 12 steps. That's the job of the sponsor." Now, I was already talking to this guy for the last 6 weeks. He was a guy in my meeting. He was very nice to me. When I called, he answered the phone. So, what was the difference between calling him my sponsor and not calling him my sponsor? If someone's not my sponsor, they can still answer my phone calls. If I'm new in the program, they can still give me their experience, strength, and hope. I get phone calls all the time from people who are not the people I sponsor, and they ask me for, they share, and I share with them my experience, strength, and hope. So that's not sponsorship. The difference was we're going to go through the steps. The problem is this potential sponsor, I say potential because we never did do the steps. The person who agreed to be my sponsor said to me, "Here's the thing. You have to stop acting out." You see, during those 6 weeks, I wasn't sober at all. He's like, "Are you ready to make a decision that you're done acting out? Because the steps aren't going to be very helpful if you're not sober." And I was very unsure about this thing called not acting out. So I asked him if I can have a few days to finish some of the acting out things that I still hadn't finished. And now I know he was trying really hard not to laugh, but he said, "Sure." I said, "I just need 2 days and I'll be back." And he said, "Fine." He said, "But you need to be sober. Like when you come back, you're going to have to first make a decision, no acting out." And I left his house. And do I need to tell you that I was not back in 2 days? I was not back in 2 weeks. I was not back in 2 months because my 2 days of acting out turned into a lot of months of daily relapses and progression. I don't consider that guy my first sponsor because we never did step work. And eventually, somebody dragged me to a meeting I had never been to, maybe 6 months later, and introduced me to the person who was going to be my first sponsor. And on the very first day that I met him, he had a little bag. He pulled out this little pamphlet of step questions. It was called the Riverside Guide. And he said, "Read step zero in the white book and answer the questions on step zero and email me the answers." We started step work immediately. He became my sponsor immediately. And I got to tell you, if I had not gone through the first three steps, step zero, step one, step two, and eventually step three, I would not be sober today. I cannot stay sober without the steps. Now, I never would have started a fourth step, and this guy never would have sponsored me through the fourth step if I was still acting out. But eventually, I finished all the questions on step zero, step one, step two, and my relapses started getting fewer and fewer. I was still acting out, but not as often. And eventually, The day came where I celebrated 30 days of sobriety, and I gave my first step to the group. And the group, and I did not do it during a meeting, so that I wasn't rushed to have to finish my share in a certain amount of time. I shared my first step after the meeting was over. There was no time limit. I just shared. It took me about 45 minutes of sharing all the crap I had done that I had written out ahead of time. I had reviewed it with my sponsor ahead of time. And then the group got together and gave me feedback, one person at a time. A beautiful group of probably 15, 20 guys were there. Each one got to share. And that was my second step. I was part of this group. And that was at 30 days sober. From 30 to 90 days or 80 days, I worked really hard on getting ready for my fourth step. At 90 days sober, I took my third step and immediately, like the big book says, immediately took my third step and started the fourth step. My sponsor sent me an email with one of these fourth step worksheets, and we got to work. And that's my story of getting into the steps. And that's why I maintain that it's really nice to say that so and so is my sponsor, but if we're just recovery friends, then just call it recovery friends. If it's a recovery friend that you've decided you're going to listen to every damn thing that that person says, great, then call it your recovery friend currently in the service position of my higher power. Or call it your sponsor if you want. That doesn't mean it's your sponsor. It just means that you decided to call it your sponsor. He identifies as your sponsor. You'll forgive my political reference. That doesn't make him your sponsor unless you guys are doing step work. Now, I will be honest. I would not be sober today if I worked my own program and sponsored myself and gave myself my own advice, because I was such a nut. In Yiddish, we'll say a meshugana. I was insane. So, if not my sponsor, anyone, if anyone not named Shem told me to do something, I did it. And by the way, unless you tell me to like get divorced, sell my house, put my kids up for adoption, unless you quit my job, if you just tell me something, I don't care who you are, I will take your suggestion as a requirement. Still today, because my best thinking got me to this damn program, and I will not be a fool anymore and think that my best thinking can't get me right back out of here. So, for example, I once sponsored a guy, and at 10 months of sobriety, he relapsed, and then he left the program, and I didn't see him again. And a few months later, I ran into him in a religious place where we were both praying somewhere, and he was there as a guest. And I said, "Hey, how's it going? Blah blah blah." We're catching up, and he said, "How are things at home?" And I said, "It's so funny you ask, because I happen to be living with a resentment right now." This was a guy who I had sponsored him, and he was no longer sober or in the program, and I was sober with a few years of sobriety. And he said to me, "Well, why don't you write down 10 gratitudes about your wife and share them with her?" And I said, "That's a great idea. That's what I'm going to do." Somebody not named Shem gave me direction. I did it. I took his suggestion as a requirement because my brain is broken. It's insane. And every so often, if I'm not able to get in touch with somebody and I'm not sure what to do and I'm disturbed, honest to goodness, I'll do the opposite of what I think because it's more likely to be the right way. My brain is broken. That's true. I agree with this. That's not a position that's unique to my sponsor. I have a whole lot of people that I connect with in the program. And maybe on Monday I talk to Joe and Joe tells me one thing. And on Tuesday I talk to Bob and Bob tells me something else. And maybe Joe and Bob gave me completely different advice. I don't care. On Monday I'll do it Joe's way, and on Tuesday I'll do it Bob's way, as long as I'm not doing it Shim's way. But that's nothing to do with sponsorship. Nothing. Of course, I have a commitment with my sponsor because he knows me best and I disclose to him most that the first person, the person that I'm closest to is my sponsor. And the 12 and 12 talks about this. The 12 and 12 on step 3 says that my sponsor is my closest SA friend. And he will try to work with me and give me some suggestions. Of course, the sponsor's suggestions better be based on his experience, strength, and hope. There is no place for giving advice in this program. And I advise you, if you have a sponsor who gives advice, be worried. That was a joke. I hope you got it. My advice is that we don't give advice. This is a program of knowing that we're a bunch of sickos, and therefore we only share experience, strength, and hope. I will tell you what worked for me, and I have no idea what worked for you. I've heard Harvey say this so many times. He'll say, "This is what worked for me. If you're able to do it differently, then good for you. I wish you well," he says. And then he usually suggests, "But I haven't seen people do it with success," whatever it is that we're talking about. But the point is, we share our experience. We don't tell people what to do. I've never had a sponsor tell me what to do. My sponsor has always said, "Well, what do you think about this? Would you consider doing that?" Or, "Here's what I do when that happens to me." Or, "Here's what I think." And if I come back and I say, "Hey, Anthony, I didn't do that," he says, "Okay, I'll give you a great example. My sponsor was was of the opinion that his sobriety was none of his wife's business. And I didn't want that kind of marriage. I wanted a marriage where I had no secrets. I wanted a marriage where if you were going to hate me for who I am, sucks for you, but I'm done living that way. I was going to live honestly. So I found other people in SA who were living that way, and I took their advice. And I would tell Anthony, I had this relapse, and I told my wife about it. And he would say, "Why do you need to tell her?" And I would say, "Because, Anthony, that's what kind of marriage I want." And he would say, "Okay, well, if that works for you, then you have my support. I don't understand it, but I support it." He didn't say, "Go get yourself a different sponsor." He understood that I have my life and he has his. Great example. All right, I think 15 minutes is long enough for my experience. I'm sharing my experience. I just felt after all the talk today about sponsorship and the definition of sponsorship that I just felt moved and compelled and felt the need to share um, where I'm coming from and my experience. I hope this was helpful to somebody. God bless you all. Have a good night, guys.